Awesome. Okay, well, welcome to the show, Lee.
It's a pleasure to be on today with you guys.
Yes, thank you. So we wanted to start with talking about one of the things that you mentioned in your form, and you have a very interesting path with getting sick or having your chronic illness and then being disabled and then overcoming that. But part of what you said in there is it's easy to just keep traveling on the wrong path until crisis hits. But I want to inspire others to start asking the questions before their health or relationship fails. So, where I wanted to start was, well, why do you think that you were on the wrong path before you had your health crisis?
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite multifaceted if I kind of look at it in perspective. So I had a relatively stable childhood, not particularly from a wealthy background, but I was the first one in my family to go to university, and that was kind of like something that was in a lot of ways pushed because I attained good grades throughout my education without much effort, and I was curious and I was disruptive. But when you get good grades, you get funneled down an educational pathway. And when I was at university, I had some serious mental health issues, which caused me to drop out and be taken home, and then go back and complete after 6 months out, which was a valuable period for me in a lot of ways because I had to start to explore my own self awareness and emotional intelligence. So that made me more aware. But then the events after that, then getting a graduate job and losing that due to the economic crash in 2008, that all happened within 6 months of graduation. So I kind of started to chisel a pathway that I felt aligned and resonated with two things that I really enjoy: helping people and working with algorithms, data, statistics, and patterns. So I went into financial advisory and started to really anchor into that pathway as a potential career. And that was taken away very quickly and then simply became an area where I couldn't get back into due to the nature of the industry. So I decided to actually set up a video game business and went working in local government to start to chisel really what I could do going forward and whether financial advisor would actually be for me if I went on a bit of a journey. And what kind of happened is the business took off. And in a lot of ways, it pulled me with it, started to pull me away from my values a little bit. I still worked alongside that business for 4 years, trying to find something that resonated with the people side, because that business resonated with the algorithms and the data side, but I didn't have that personal helping interaction, that fulfillment. So I was kind of searching, and what the illness actually did was it helped me stop and then analyze the searching and analyze what had happened over the past 5 years, because that had gone very quickly from business starting to business being almost up to seven figures, and me still working and trying to find. My son was born, I got married, and a lot of life events happened very quickly, and I hadn't in that 5 years actually stopped and thought, right, let's reflect, let's look what's happened in the past 5 years, all the things that I've done, and pick a direction. Things were starting to move me forward. And what I was doing is it was kind of looking at it, started to see that I was traveling at quite some speed east when actually the place where I wanted to be was to the west. And I was moving further and further away from what was going to fulfill me in the long term. So my illness actually gave me a gap to move into, to actually sit there and think, right, once I've recovered, what direction do I want to travel in? Because I've literally been immobilized. But that's a good thing right now because I was probably moving further and further away from where I wanted to be.
Wow, that's really powerful stuff. And from the outside, I imagine a lot of people would think, well, you started your video game business. How cool is that? You're moving through, you're getting married, almost seven figures. Like, what? How could you possibly think that you were unfulfilled? Like, can you describe the feeling that you had as you were going through this growth and just realizing, hey, this other half of me is being neglected?
Yeah, so I think in a lot of ways, obviously, living at that kind of speed and all those life events happening, You don't sit down and start to write. You don't sit down and explore. You're kind of thinking, right, what's next? And you're living rather than being. So having the opportunity to suddenly slow down significantly, and obviously in the past 6 months, a lot of people have also had that opportunity. But what that actually did is I just had to think, right, okay, so potentially I might not actually be mobile again. While I'm very positive about my health outcomes and I'm moving forward, I'm going to face some challenges and I need to recover as well as I can for my children and for myself. And I actually want to make an impact. What it did is it showed me a little bit of my own mortality. So at that point, I was 29, a young man. Like so many young men out there, you're almost a little bit invincible, a little bit bulletproof. And I'd never been in hospital before this, and I'd looked after myself. I looked after my health, my fitness. So in a lot of ways, it was a big shock. But what it did is it kind of reorientated me and made me think, okay, so if I was to, if this was to become more serious and attack my body so bad that I passed away, would I be happy with the world that I left behind, the legacy that I had, and the difference that I'd made? And the answer was no. And that kind of sparked an element of realization. The other realization was I realized I need to be resilient through that recovery and be proactive. And I look back to previous times of resilience through my mental health challenges and through redundancy and realized that in each of those periods, I'd taken a step to actually look and reorientate after coming out of those, after hitting that crisis point, and then finding that gratitude afterwards for the fact that actually I've lost one thing, but I still have so much. How can I use the so much that I have to benefit my future? And that kind of vision made me realize that, yeah, I might have lost my mobility and some of my physicality for this moment in time. But that aside, I've still got so much in my life. But how can I use that? What kind of father do I want to be? What kind of world do I want to, see in the future? And really, I just started to think about impact more than finance, because obviously, when you run a business and you're in the thick of it, there is a financial element, and my kind of statistical mind likes to work with those figures. But naturally, what happens is you start to segment that and realize that actually it's a difference in the impact that was making me happy, not the figures. And you start to see that. And if there's any way to kind of make this make this stick to people, so I had a 4x4, a nice big shiny one, because from societal perspective, I was well off. We had our own house, we had our own vehicles, and we lived in a nice neighborhood. Try transferring from a wheelchair into a big 4x4 vehicle. You look like an idiot. And if anything, that's a perfect way to help people understand that actually, you have these shiny things, you have some money in the bank, but what difference have you made? Are you happy inside? Are you fulfilled in what you're doing? And I actually realized that no, I'm not. It might be resonating part of me, but I want the whole spectrum inside of me to be like an orchestra, all in tune, in harmony, and all sequenced and working together. And I knew that I could utilize the business that I had to aid my recovery, to again pay more resources towards my future training, but also as a vehicle towards building a separate business that would actually fulfill the whole range of notes inside of me that needed playing.
Wow, what a beautiful visual. And you want your insides to be like an orchestra. I love that. For our listeners who may not have the benefit of knowing what your chronic illness is, can you walk us through what had happened?
Yeah, so I was 29, fit and healthy, and my immune system started to attack a particular type of connective tissue in my joints. So just on one Friday afternoon, my wrist started to swell up. And by the end of the day, it looked like two baseballs fused together. So naturally, I was a bit worried, but I thought I'd maybe banged it or knocked it during the week, or just maybe just been on a computer for too long that week. But on the Sunday, it started to happen to my knee. And then by the end of Sunday, my knee was like a football. So that wasn't great. I hobbled to the doctors. They gave me some corticosteroids, said it's really swollen, this should take it down. And then the day after, it started to happen to my shoulder, which started to rise up towards my ear. And then on the Wednesday, my other knee went, and I had two knees like footballs and couldn't move. So I got taken to hospital. And it went from there. They tested me for a lot of things to try and find the initial source. They tested my immune system to try and work out exactly why it was, rejecting this type of tissue. And it's obviously really complex, and we're only in the early days of understanding this, but they drained a lot of fluid off my knees. And then effectively I couldn't weight bear on my legs, and I couldn't move my legs really. I'd lost the elasticity in my tendons and ligaments, and yeah, it was very, very painful as well, because obviously my body was attacking itself. And I was in hospital for a month while they tested and tried to get me into as good a place as they could to discharge me. And then I went into walking rehab and then into intensive physiotherapy to get back moving again. And I was kind of back on my feet after 6 months, but my walking gait, it was compromised, and it was compacting my lumbar vertebrae together. So that was quite painful, and put me back into physiotherapy again. And it was 11 months before I walked a mile without any aids. And it was a challenging time. And not long after I came out of hospital, my daughter was born. So for me, it was a real mission to be able to walk by the time she was walking, and just be able to take her first steps with her. And that was a real big driver and a real big why and fuel inside of me on those mornings when I was struggling, when I was in pain, when I was stiff, to be consistent with my recovery. And her pram was quite often my walking aid in those early days. And we went on our little walks together, and we've got a real strong bond, which is kind of born from being together through those challenging times. And yeah, she's now 6, and we still go walking together. We went walking together earlier today, and it's those moments that you really cherish when you the journey that it's took to be there in those shoes.
I remember reading that in an article. I think that you had wrote about how you wanted you and your daughter to kind of embark on this this journey together, and I was just so moved by that. And I think it's great. I love that. And you mentioned using this period of pause in essence to kind of reflect on what would provide you with fulfillment. So then how did that transform your business into what it is now?
Yeah, so obviously I had the video game business at the time of becoming unwell. And the real power of that is that it was a business that I could run digitally, even from hospital with one hand. And I was incredibly lucky in that respect, because if I'd have had a business that required me to be physically there, or to carry out physical actions, I would have suffered financially, and I would have suffered in terms of the business. So what actually happened is I was incredibly grateful for the business that I had, even though it wasn't really fulfilling me inside, because what that allowed me to do was not worry about my finances during my recovery. I was still able to help that business and have that business function, not optimally, but the majority of the way there. And when you're recovering from chronic illness and loss of mobility, those worries about finances would have made it a much more challenging time for me. So not having those challenges, I really appreciated that. But what I realized is that I'd built that business, and a lot of ways it had come from the frustrations of being told that I wouldn't be able to, that I would struggle, and from the fact that, again, it kind of came out of desperation. I'd lost that graduate position on a career path. I'd lost the funding, I'd lost the job, and had to move back into my parents' back bedroom and almost start life again as a graduate. And that had caused me to be very tunnel visioned with that business. I was going to succeed, to show people that I could, to prove to people that I said I struggled that they were wrong. And what that meant is it was built with a lot of force and a lot of frustration fueling it. And that can be incredibly powerful fuel to make people do things and, ultimately show others, because sometimes we'll do more for others than we'll do for ourselves. most of the time, if we be honest. What it made me realize is I could reorientate that business and utilize it to my own benefit, because I was lucky enough to have it still functioning through illness. So therefore it became a tool for my recovery, because it was giving me the resources, both the time and financially, to recover. A year on and I'm back on my feet. And I think again, right, how do I utilize the business to achieve what I want to achieve, rather than just growing it mindlessly in this endless chase of growth and scaling? So I said, I'm going to keep it as it is. I'm just going to keep it stable, paying me enough money to be happy. And I did that. And what that allowed me to do is spend 5 years at home with my children before they started school. Something that I'm incredibly grateful for, because no time or money you can ever get back in that respect. Now they started school, I understand, because ultimately it was the right thing to do. I don't see them as much now they're at school, but those years spent at home with them, maximizing that time in their early formative years, has meant that now my children are incredibly close to me, while I see that compounding effect on the other side of some of my friends who spent a lot of time away working, and how they have to try and make up for those relationships now. They don't have that same bond. They try much harder and it becomes less authentic, because they are really trying in a way that is sometimes becomes throwing money at the children a little bit more, or kind of overemphasizing the time. And we just have a very natural flaw, because we've kind of set those routines and always been that way. And actually now today with a new business, I'm away a little bit more, but they understand, because they actually know the kind of work that daddy's doing, and that it makes daddy happy, and that daddy's helping other people like daddy helps them. So it's really valuable. But what happened is I said, I'm going to start this business, the coaching, the psychology, the wellbeing business, when my daughter starts school. So I went back and completed my master's, and I started to build the structures and the frameworks. And when my daughter started school in September last year, I launched the business. And now we're a year in, and an awful lot's happened during that year, mostly positive. But I honestly feel that I wake up in the morning like I'm ready, because this is more than just a job. It's more than a career. It's effectively my calling packaged into a business. And when you kind of hit that like vibration, it just feels like, you're energized. Like my attention, my concentration is very, very focused, and I have the energy to deliver, to assist people. And I see the smiles, I see the difference, I see workplace cultures changing, I see people feel like they start to belong, I see people taking more authority for their own health behaviors, and that's really, really powerful. And in June, I sold the video game business to another company, a company that shares very similar values that I've worked with previously. So I know that my associates within that company are now working with another company where there is that resonance, where those values are aligned, where the culture is very similar. And that was important to me. I got less money overall for the company than I would have done had I sold it to some of the competitors. But at the end of the day, you want your company, something you built over 11 years, to be merged into something where it's going to be still like it feels like it belongs, like it's included, and together they'll still feel that they're at home.
That's awesome. So I took a moment to look at your website, and the services you offer are unique. And I love it. You are an environmental psychologist and a well-being consultant. Now, for our listeners, they may not know what an environmental psychologist is. I know I sure didn't. And so could you maybe share what an environmental psychologist is and how it complements the work that you do as a well-being consultant?
Yeah, so I think the best way to break it down for people, because most people they probably have a rough idea what environmental psychologists do, but the easiest way to look at it is within three different pillars, three strands. So the first strand looks at urban environments, how the design and implementation affects human behaviors, thoughts, feelings, interactions, and overall how it impacts on human well-being, being in human-built urban environments. So that's the area where a lot of my work ties in to the well-being side of things. And it means that I do end up working with a variety of people, from architects to city planners to transport network designers. It's a wide and varied job, but there's an awful lot of interdisciplinary people that you will deal with on a daily basis in that role. Second pillar is nature interaction. So looking at how humans interact with nature and how that can affect our attention, our focus, our well-being, and just generally looking at nature's energy and starting to understand how when humans spend significant amounts of time in nature, it actually changes how we then interact with the world itself. So naturally they tend to look at things such as forest bathing, ecotherapy, nature therapy, all the way across to looking at ultimately how accessible nature is for different categories of people, looking at how nature awareness plays an impact in how people behave, and looking really how we can utilize nature to our benefit even when it's not as close as you might want it to be. And the third pillar looks specifically at environmental behaviours. So they're getting a really interesting job. Like some of my contemporaries, they can be another level, because what they're actually looking at every day is how can one person think that climate change is incredibly, detrimental and is going to cause us significant harm in the near future, while the person who lives next to them denies that it exists and doesn't believe that it does. And we start to look, as an environmental psychologist focused on environmental behaviour, at how and why that spectrum is so wide and how you can start to move people. And for some people, obviously, it's very contextual. So people feel that that's black and white, really black and white. You should believe it or you shouldn't. But actually, there's a context to why people believe what they believe. And that's quite wide. I mean, it's affected by social norms, social proof, group theory, and ultimately the culture that they live in, the beliefs, the upbringing, the people they associate with. There's so many factors. And they look at things such as environmental disasters and how people interact with those, all the way through to like littering, recycling and waste management, and how the behaviours there change depending on where you go and how people interact with the areas and how that then impacts on how they behave. So yeah, I mean that's a really like acute way of telling people the three sections. Now, where does my section come in to workplace wellbeing, which is where I specialise? Well, ultimately, the design of an office is and has an environmental design. A lot of offices are not built with that in mind, not to a greater level, and obviously older offices tend to suffer a little bit in that aspect because it's quite a relatively new way of looking at things. But I'll go into an office, and from an environmental psychology perspective, we're looking at physical things such as the density and capacity of people who are there, the ventilation, the lighting, the acoustics, and starting to look at the environmental stresses which people face within work. Everything, again, from the density to how closely they have to communicate and collaborate, all the way across the temperature and regulation across zones. And what's interesting is those environmental stresses, they impact us every day, especially for people who work in a situated space for what could be 8 hours over the course of time. That environmental stress can accumulate, and everyone has a different environmental design and environmental need. So some people would actually be happier in the darker, cooler part of the office, whereas some would like the lighter, warmer part. And it's about actually starting to look and see where are your people best utilised. But then that's the physical aspect. There's also a psychological aspect to design as well, looking at features such as incorporating more biophilia, so more plant-based design and nature-based design in office spaces, and actually looking at, from a psychological perspective, the environment. What's the culture like? Is it toxic? Do people feel like they belong there? Do people feel like they're included and things are accessible? Is that space designed in a way that it flows for the people who work there? So often the end user isn't involved in every stage of the design process. That's an issue, because ultimately this office, and so often it happens, it passes from architects who go to school to learn. They get various design schools that are standard, that are evidence-based. they tend to migrate towards one that really resonates with them. And then they'll start to want to get some nice stuff for their portfolio. But then it goes to the board to have a look and, yeah, these plans look good. Then it goes to financiers to budget, back to board again, so when that gets signed off. Facilities and external companies then come and implement the design. And in some companies, people are literally told, right, you and your department sit here. Okay, well, at what point have they had integration and participation in that process? Because we all have that different environmental need. Most people are relatively acute to that. Like, they'll know the thermal comfort levels. They'll know if they're feeling cold. They'll complain about it. But it started to look at some of the things such as, background acoustics, background noise, that it's not acute and you don't really get the cue to say it's too noisy. But that buzzing of that server behind you over a year or two, that stress builds up, can cause sickness, can cause, your concentration start to wane, your attention to be all over the place. But not everyone is aware of that in the same way. And when we kind of look at that on a wider perspective, what niggles employees every day because the office hasn't been designed with them in mind, with their experience in the workplace. And it's then knitting all that together, looking at the physical design, psychological design, and then looking how that impacts on overall well-being, how people are regenerated or drained from the working environments, and then starting to look at the consciousness of leadership, the communication, the capability of management, and how the business's values are they lived, are they congruent, and can individual employees attach their values on that journey so that they feel that they're actually moving and progressing towards where they want to be. Because that, again, is a vital part of having engaged, motivated, and happy employees. And at that point, when you've got all that foundation in place, can you start to look at some of the health behavior change, some of the more tangible aspects of well-being? Because at that very fundamental level, employees want to participate and have some, investment in that company's values and direction. They want some autonomy to grow as human beings and into role, and they want some appreciation for the work that they do.
What a wonderful answer. Thank you. Working in the field of consultancy, oftentimes the people that will reach out aren't the decision makers. And you're right, a lot of decisions are made without the majority of the people in the room. So if someone's listening right now, how can individuals who maybe don't have the pull or the authority to make these large scale changes to their work environment, what can they do to make their work environment just a little bit healthier?
Yeah, so quite often my advice is, and it's a large part of the work that I do, but one of the key aspects that I quite often come across is that what I highlight in my initial report to leadership, people have complained about before. People have highlighted a number of times. Now, it's all good when a company's paid me to produce that report. I've got a few letters after my name, and I come with a certain level of credibility and authority and put that report in front of them. But to be honest, more often than not, a significant amount of that feedback is garnered from the employees, and management will say, oh, we've heard that before. Unfortunately, when a single employee takes a problem to management, it's quite often ignored, quite often overlooked. That person, they complain, they're always a bit negative. And the reality is, if more often than not, you'll get one particular thing that niggles about 80% of the employees. If you can find a way to collaborate together as employees and actually take a shared concern, much more likely to get action taken upon it from a leadership and management level. But also, there is a bit of autonomy quite often with someone's individual workspace. And it's up to you to utilize and design that for your own benefit, to actually look at what you need within your environment. And some people like it more minimalist. Some people really like things, memories and ornaments that bring that little feeling of nostalgia every time they look at them, to bolster them in the challenging times. And yet all of a sudden, during COVID, we've had a very much a global case study, which would have had no other way to have been undertaken. but millions and millions of people suddenly designing their own work environments while working from home. And that has brought, a whole new realm of you being able to design it yourself. But all the challenges of trying to integrate that into a domestic environment, which is generally not designed for us to work from effectively. And for some people, that's been a real chance for them to design it themselves, and they've thrived. Whereas others have found that it's just the loss of structure has been really challenging. And where they live, simply they're struggling for that congruence to find a space to really carve out and work effectively. And in so many ways, this is now an opportunity for people to look and think, is there more flexibility for me to design my own environment, and a way for me to take concerns in a more amplified way? Because the truth is, and the future is, you work there. So you actually have a lot more ownership than you think.
Mm-hmm. It isn't just what they give you. And it's really interesting. I'm hearing you talk about, this global experiment, right, that we're undergoing. And I just remember for myself, I don't have children. My partner is an essential worker. I was by myself for, 12, 14-hour days at my house. And even though I had my space together, I missed people. I just like, that was one of the things that really came to the surface for me. And so I was having these rich conversations with adjusters or opposing counsel, because I just missed that interaction, and I didn't realize how much I would miss that. So we're fortunate that we're back in the office, but we're also dealing with a lot of the things that you're talking about. How do we deal with the space? How do we have shared space and still be safe with COVID? Really fascinating stuff. And so how is your business that you're in now, how is that more aligned with your values?
Yeah, so much of the business that I have now, it still takes that resonance within me of patterns and data and algorithms, but I now utilize that to measure the effectiveness of well-being within organizations. So I actually decided to create my own index called KHIs, Key Happiness Indicators, to run alongside businesses' KPIs and KPOs. And they can then actually look, because a lot of businesses, well-being is not always the most tangible thing within business. And it quite often doesn't get the, well, what's the return on investment? Well, there are lots of studies to actually show what the return on investment is. Truth be told, some people still need that data-driven aspect and want to see it measured, want to see how effective it is, and want to see how you can make a sustainable business case for well-being, even if budgets were to drop. And I managed to get my pattern and algorithm fix through doing that. The beauty is I then actually deliver and bespoke programs from that strategy. So I get to deliver to the people. I get to work with a whole wide range of people in a number of different industries. And that is that kind of helping people aspect, a big tick in that box. And that just really fills me up, because I actually get to go on a journey with a lot of different people. And we have a number of touch points across the programs that I run. And you see people changing in front of your eyes. You see people being able to connect to not only my story, but their own story, and start to explore and experiment a little bit, which is a lot of what my work does. It's quite interactive. It's very much designed to engage with the people who I'm interacting with, because so much well-being just comes as a standard package, tick a box, compliance, done, check, brought in. But I actually research and find, what are the challenges that the people who I'm going to be interacting with face? What are their industry's problems and pain points? What are the things that they're going to be facing every day? And I actually take a bit of time to get to know each individual, so I can deliver in a way that's authentic for them, while still being myself, but giving a little bit of them and a little bit of tailoring of their experience. Because again, if you feel like your situation is appreciated and you're not being given advice, you're being given some encouragement and empowerment to start to look at well-being differently, and really helping people to actually start to dig a bit deeper into their own well-being reasons, their own well-being why, because that's what fuels people's change, fuels people taking a bit more authority for their own health, for their own happiness, and starting to help them understand that actually all you need is already inside of you. And it's just about starting to, look and see how we can get a little bit more of that to come to the surface, building that self-awareness, that emotional intelligence, and looking how they can express themselves in the workplace, because people have so much to give. And if you ask them to kind of rate themselves, everyone rates themselves really low. On a scale of 1 to 10, you ask them what they're capable of, and they'll give you a 3. The mother will give them a 4. The boss will probably give them a 5. And really, they're all capable of a 9 or a 10. And so often it's just that belief, that understanding, that being able to harness what's inside of them. And it's really a much more holistic process than you'll quite often see in the wellness space being delivered in more corporate arenas, because it's still very much looking at how well-being drives performance, but it's looking at well-being in people rather than well-being in business processes. And it still does look at how well-being can be measured within business processes, but more so how well-being can become sustainable and embedded, because I'm not going to be with that company forever, and I'm not going to be on that journey. So we look and start to understand how the people within that company can become champions of well-being for themselves, for others, build little well-being communities that organically grow within those companies, even when I'm not there. And looking at that longer term understanding, that's what, lights me up, because I'll go back to a company a year after working with them and see that the seeds that I planted started to grow.
Wow. We've spent a lot of time talking about companies and the individuals within there, but one of the things that I really like on your website is that if you sign up, you get your ebook, which I got to tell you is one of the best ebooks that I've seen. I very much into wellness and into self-improvement, so I've downloaded quite a bit of them. And what I love about your your ebook, it is so thorough, and you talk about the 6 pillars of finding your life's purpose in there. And it's a way for people to basically answer these 70 questions to find their purpose. I wanted to talk about that with you. I have a little bit of an idea of how you got there with everything that you've been talking about, but can you talk about these 6 pillars so that way people can go and definitely go download this ebook? It's fantastic.
Yeah, if I'm to kind of like frame the ebook for people, the reason why I've kind of gone with that structure, the questions and the exercises, is because so many ebooks are trying to tell you the answer, but the answer's not in the ebook. The answer's in you. And the truth is, there's 70 questions because not every question resonates with every person. In fact, for most people, only a few of those questions will really dig within inside you. But by digging inside yourself, things start to come out. You start to shake yourself like a snow globe, and everything flies up into the air. But when it all settles, you start to feel a little bit more purposeful in what you do. And I was a bit, how should we say, with the whole naming of the book, because I'm very, very frustrated with the personal development industry telling people that they can help you find your purpose, because you don't find your purpose like some treasure chest or, a car on the street. You actually chisel it over time by going out and doing things that you enjoy, things that you don't enjoy, and actually reflecting and looking what bits of those made me feel that way, and starting to look, why do I react in that way in these situations? And you start to look and realize there's a number of underlying threads in your life about things that you really, really become purposeful when you're doing. And you only get that by going out there and trying a lot of things, getting outside of your comfort zone and really starting to explore and experiment in the world that we live in today. And for me, those questions just help you maybe to start to move in the right direction, to shift the needle on the compass. So you've got a bit more of an idea of the direction to go in, to start chiseling and, carving out a more purposeful life. But yeah, I mean, it's always good to do exercise and ask a few questions, because we live in a world full of answers. Education is all about getting the answer, put it on the paper, well done, through to the next stage of life. But the power within us is by asking questions, because Google has 95% of the answers, and that's not going to help you in the long-term scheme of things. But our ability to gradually question ourselves, and when you first start, you get some really bad answers because you're probably not great at asking questions. But if it's a skill that if you practice, along with actively listening in the world and actually absorbing what people say and being able to process it and actually, ensuring that they feel like they're being heard, you start to actually open up a Pandora's box of tricks, which can really help you start to get a lot more clarity. And once you get good at asking questions of yourself, you suddenly become really good at asking questions of others.
That answer gave me chills. The answer isn't in the ebook, it's in yourself. I mean, it literally took my breath away. Wow. And your business, environmental psychologist, complements so well with the well-being consultant. What is it about your business that you enjoy most, and why?
Yeah, so what I actually enjoy most is speaking to people. So I've always been quite, I suppose with the video game business, what it did is I'm quite introverted by nature. So I get quite a lot of energy just spending time on my own, mulling things over, thinking, and trying to alchemize things. So that curiosity that I've had since a child, I'm still curious today. And it's funny because in a lot of ways, I'll stand in a boardroom and I'm a bit like a 7-year-old. I ask why a lot. I ask a lot of questions. I don't take the basics for granted. And I can be quite energetic and occasionally say things that, are seen to be disruptive or, generally speaking, quite blunt, quite like a child. Children don't tend to lie very well. Me neither. So it's like sometimes I can cause a little bit of discourse, but I love finding out about people's journeys and stories, and that is the most enjoyable bit for me is working individually with people and watching them on their journey. But hopefully, as from a coaching and well-being perspective, helping them start to see that what I've been searching for all along, it's here. It's already here. I just needed someone to, give me a bit of a shake, maybe give me a key or two, or just maybe a shovel, depending on how deep it is inside. But society is it's a paradoxical thing. When we're born, we've got absolutely none of the layers of the mass of the beliefs and all that stuff that gets covered all over us. By the time we're an adult, we're absolutely covered in society's grime, and most people are chasing after society's candy. And it takes a magical shower to wash some of that off, and a new pair of glasses to really be able to see that actually it's not all about society's candy. There's some really nice candy out there for you with your name on it, but you're just not able to see it unless you put those glasses on. And it's kind of helping people on that journey to realize that, at one point I, from societal standards, had it all, and then I was in a hospital bed. And yeah, you've actually got that dream. It's within you already. That ambition, it's there, but we just become so unattuned to it. We lose our acuity. The modern world is just designed for comfort. It's designed to overstimulate us while never stimulating the bits of us which are really valuable. And with our attention being pulled around and so many inputs, at what point do you actually get to stop and embrace some boredom, some solitude? Because that's where the magic is. That's where people's innovative ideas come. When they're out on a walk, when they're in the shower, when they've spent some time in nature, disconnected. And that's becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable in this world. And as an environmental psychologist, I'm able to help people to understand, actually, go and take a workplace walk, have a walking meeting, have a walking networking club at dinner, actually get out into the forest, which is right next to your concrete block of an office, and go and expand your mind, get your cognitive processes flowing, get your creativity, and everyone will come back in the afternoon and they won't be falling asleep on their desk. And yeah, we are polyphasic creatures, and yeah, we are supposed to sleep twice, But society's washed that out of us already. So you may as well get as good an afternoon as you can by just getting out there. And yeah, if anything, for me, there's so much advice and so many answers, but I'm just asking people questions, giving them some support and encouraging them to find their own.
Wow. That's lovely. Thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and ask you our signature questions that we ask all of our guests. Reflecting back, what would you tell your younger self?
Just don't worry about trying to have it all figured out so young. So I was in that curiosity that I had as a young man. I wanted to know, how does this work? What am I going to be? What am I going to become? And those questions pushed me into a challenging place because you don't have it all figured out. And by the time you're on your deathbed, you still haven't figured it out. But if you get a good vision of who you are, self-awareness to what you can become, you'll start moving in that direction. You won't be asking yourself anymore. You'll just be moving in that direction on a journey. And you won't even be looking at the outcome. You'll be looking at and celebrating the little views along the way of your journey.
Love that. So looking forward, what is one wish you have for yourself or perhaps your organization on your current journey?
Yes, so my one wish is to positively impact the health, well-being and happiness of 1 million adults and children through my company and have that impact and difference in the world. Because if I can impact 1 million people, and those 1 million people will impact all the people in their spheres as well. And that'll mean that one day when I pass away to the next realm or wherever I go, I'll have left a happier and healthier world.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lee, for sharing your time with us and your wisdom.
No, the privilege is all mine.
You can learn more about Lee Chambers, download his free ebook, and learn more about his services on his website, essentialize.co.uk. We'll link his info on our website. How is your physical environment impacting your well-being? Head over to our private Facebook community where you can discuss this episode and share your thoughts. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late and you're right on time.